Okay, everybody, welcome to the Ioc Podcast. My name is Joel Bosch. I'm the founder of the Coin and IO Digital project, along with a whole bunch of wonderful devs and developers that we've had throughout the years. And today, I am very excited. We have a treat for our community, and we're joined by our lead developer. I call him Batman. And he's with us today. His name is Derek Hatton, and I'm so pleased that he's with us today.
Oh, glad to be here.
So Derek, it's like I said before, this is a treat for our community. You usually are not speaking so much, and the reason being I could actually answer this for you is because you're usually working, and you're working so hard for our community, and we find ourselves mostly just working on this advances on blockchain. And sometimes people see a lot of developers out there on Twitter and being very vocal, but I always say to myself, I mean, when are these people finding time to get anything done? And you usually, yeah, and usually this is not the way you operate because you're always working. So I'm gonna now allow you to finally, introduce yourself to the community and let us know all these years that you've been working on Ledger, and this is just gonna be an amazing thing for us to hear. So Derek, introduce yourself to our community at this time. Thank you so much.
Sure. Well, by training, I'm actually a physicist and electronics engineer who happens to have done a lot of programming. Having said that, I've been programming in industry since 1998, a range of industry sectors. I started off in pharmaceuticals and progressed to telecommunications, fault monitoring. From there, I progressed to high-energy physics data acquisition systems. I found blockchain and its potential for development very intriguing later, with the rest of the technology still very much in its infancy and still in the proof of concept phase. I was intrigued by the potential for developing this in directions which it didn't seem to appear to be moving in, where it could be married with the wider field of big data and big data applications and artificial intelligence. And what I was seeing was just a widely adopted prototype. It was really there's a lot of scope for development of this in areas that I am interested in. I would be very much interested in developing in the future.
Derek, a lot of these blockchains that have come out, I would say in the last 2 or 3 years, especially Ethereum and, other syscoins, and there are a few other blockchains, I can go down the line, the Ripples, they all have different either algorithms or basically the code base, either JS or Go. In terms of IOC, it's base code, C++. Can you tell us, what do you think is the strongest area in terms of our algorithm in C++ versus the Go's and the other languages that are being used currently?
When you break it down, it goes beyond blockchain and what people perceive as blockchain as such. The ingredients of works goes way back before Satoshi and Bitcoin. Roots of all this and the components can be found in distributed system software going back decades. The cryptographic component is completely independent of blockchain. For example, elliptic curve cryptography, distributed systems with high degree failover. When you look at blockchain, it is actually built up from components. There's actually particularly special about blockchain. To me, it's the potential for blockchain. Having said that, I've seen with Ethereum that the base is it is maintained in a way which is, let's say, very. It appears that there are a lot of people trying to input things which do not really. They are not really consistent. They don't form a consistent picture, and the result is a system which it tends to have a lot of inconsistencies and bugs. One of the strengths of the Ioc base is its simplicity, and that it has been programmed by a consistent set of developers with a common aim in the development within our proof of stake algorithm, and this based on the original. This goes back to Peercoin. So the consistent has been gradual and steady and well tested. Whereas with code bases like Ethereum, there is really a problem of direction, and the code is veering around in different ways, and the code standards are inconsistent. There's unfortunately a problem with a lot of bug scraping in there, and a lot of feature creep. And in what I see with our code base is that consistency over time since 2014 or whatever, when it branched off from Peercoin, so that we have a consistent code base and it is simple. And then later we were able to build well on this with our encrypted messaging and communications technology, which is unique.
I mean, we really we went beyond our original roadmap, which was just to create pseudonames on the blockchain, and that alone, when you're trying to do this without forking some other blockchain, right, and you're actually doing it from the ground up, scratch, it's a lot of work, especially with the features of allowing the pseudonyms to be transferred between users. Can you talk to us a little bit about the challenges and in terms of the code base, taking that code from the ground with the other developers and actually developing not only the pseudonyms but also the encrypted messaging and enabling the capabilities for IOC to be able to store 1 megabyte blocks of data.
Encrypted data, yes.
Correct. If you can talk to us a little bit about that. Yeah.
Well, the original thing I was to look at was the inclusion of aliases instead of complicated Ioc addresses, which are not memorable for most people. To use generic logical names, which can be assigned to them, so-called deons, what we call deons. They are human readable addresses, which map to the Ioc addresses. My original view was that this was only a small step to include, and that we could go a lot further with it. And it's interesting to go a lot further, since it would be easy to develop and build on that encrypted messaging, plain text messaging, encrypted file upload. So it was quite clear that it would be a natural progression. Alias system had upon it an encryption layer and an encrypted channel negotiation, so that we could actually have peer-to-peer chat, encrypted file upload using symmetric encryption, and have then the basis for what we are doing now, encrypted group chat, which is currently in the alpha, being helped out with that by a chap called Alfred, who is a close friend of the project.
Sometimes they compare, our AES 256 encrypted messaging to the PGP key system. Could you enlighten our community on how, even though, the PGP. I think it's PGP tools, if I'm not mistaken. They have centralization, so that right there, it's a big difference. But what would you say is the difference between the two systems? In terms of functionality.
That goes into GPG and the proprietary form PGP technology, but with a different the client software is produced by proprietary. The underlying technology that they use, RSA keys and AES. So this is a generic. These are generic factors which they and us have in common. What we do is a system which is very similar to what GPG has. Encryption is carried out by negotiation of keys using RSA keys. So, for example, when you have a GPG file that is sent to multiple in the standard GPG system or PGP, this is basically the same. You will have an RSA public key for each recipient. But instead of encrypting content for each RSA key recipient in this, it's far more efficient to generate a symmetric key and encrypt that using the GPG, using the RSA keys, and encrypt the message content. Then each recipient then can access the AES key and decrypt the message content. And what we're doing is implementation of that, actually on the blockchain. We have instead of encrypting for multiple recipients using the published RSA keys and generating a symmetric key and encrypting it, we have a channel mechanism where using the RSA key for the recipient, asymmetric key, 5-6 bits, and broadcast that over the blockchain. Is a decentralized form of this, and the mechanism that we have that enables it, this is unique. In crypto has this channel negotiation mechanism that enables a decentralized form of GPG to take place. The GPG has what one might call an ecosystem. There are key servers, so-called key servers, which hold public keys for GPG users. Now, which is decentralized, we now have the GPG keys referenced by Dion's aliases, associated with Dion's aliases. So the whole the key server setup that they use is completely decentralized in Dion's. So this whole need for key servers is not necessary either, because the RSA keys map to the user's aliases.
Right, and for anybody that would like to use this right now, we have released our API. I think it's on version 1 right now, and basically they can enable all of this by using our daemon. So this is currently available for anybody that would like to try out our messaging capabilities, the document storage, and also obviously the pseudonames. We have a game that's being developed currently by Switching Brains. Uzagi Panzer, I'm sure you've seen the guys from Switching Brains. They're actually now in the character building side of things. So we saw one yesterday. It's pretty funny. They are going to be storing some of the gamer data within the blockchain. I mean, what do you think about that, Derek? That's pretty cool stuff coming from something that we have actually put out in terms of this data storage on the chain. What do you think about other apps and gaming?
I think it's great to implement a mechanism, a decentralized form of communication with an encryption layer on a blockchain, and then someone come along and create a whole graphical layer that makes use of that in terms of a game. I think that's a great thing.
I mean, a lot of people don't know. Some of the holdup for IOC in releasing Dions was the same thing. The UI, we and this I will fault myself for. Originally, a lot of these projects use the Qt wallet. Currently, Ethereum and other projects they like to use HD wallets, which are UIs that connect or communicate to a centralized server for private keys. Our wallet, it connects directly to the blockchain, but the UI part, a lot of people were using Qt from all the projects, and at some point we decided to let go of the Qt and build our own UI, and I think that's something that maybe our community wants to know. What challenges did you see moving us away from Qt to this unique UI in JS? Although I am sure that this was not going to probably be your choice because of all the work that we had to do. But yeah, give us some feedback on this Qt, and UI direction that we went into and challenges that you had.
Well, the major issues came up with this as a result, and I don't blame anybody from before, but I just refer to the facts that the UI that we inherited was very much a design prototype. There was no real code hooks in the interface for the wallet that would enable usage of the Dion's API. We had was a mock-up. So we had an interesting design mock-up. And on the other hand, we had the very interesting possibilities for the way in which the Dion's and a communication blockchain system could develop in the future. And this was very intriguing. So intriguing stuff that could be developed. And on the one hand, we needed to have a user interface because most users, they are not familiar with command line usage or using APIs directly. So we needed a user interface, and this was a problem then. It's a real issue when you have, say, one or two persons having to look after the user interface layer, which is normally a separate team. You normally have a separate team of developers who specialize in the user interface for any. And here we had to juggle hats a bit, and the pressures were to make the user interface with our API while still pressing on to what we saw as the more important strategic goal of developing the blockchain and API mechanisms that we had planned leading up to, which are absolutely unique in blockchain space. So the user interface was really a bit of a ball and chain, given that we didn't have the full team makeup. And again, it cannot be said that we didn't look for developers. We looked intensively, you and I, for developers who might be competent to take on the wallet and user interface work. We actually found one or two initially promising candidates. For example, PankEdge developer, I think, who was able to build the user interface on OS X. Trying to further such that it uses our API, then things came to a halt. So it was really a problem to find developers who could take the UI. And at the end, and also, despite the overriding goals, in my opinion, of the blockchain mechanism, strategically, we were bound to produce the user interface. So this was a tieback. Import of this, very hard to find good developers. And it's not only with C++ knowledge in areas like JavaScript. In my opinion, it's just very difficult, full stop, to find good developers at all. And
yeah,
you can pay a professional. Yeah,
that's been definitely one of the challenges. And I'm always in this tit tat with some community members when we go and review. Most of the times they come to us, hey guys, what do you think about this project or this other project? And when we end up reviewing this project, for example, that could potentially say that they're using messaging, we see the HTTPS, and then and we're like, well, this is not really decentralized, or they're using another language, or they're actually not really implementing things within the C++ core. And when you have to work with C++ JS Mithril, right? We forgot about that little thing right there. You're talking about a very complicated UI state, which we hope in the future that we can actually upgrade from, where it's more of a simple layer between the UI and the daemon, if I'm correct with that.
In the future, we would hope to, in my opinion, rewrite the user interface from scratch using some other form of technology. But again, that would be open to the developer if we found one, presuming that the developer in question was competent. Because this is really, in my opinion, this is really the central problem, to find a competent programmer. And one might think that it's easy to look around on freelance websites and so on, but it's actually very, very difficult to find anybody competent. This is what we found, and over the last few years, it's just so difficult to find anyone who's competent at all. In my opinion, a competent technical person would be very valuable. Despite, irrespective of what programming language they knew, if we could just find someone who was competent, who could dig in and develop the thing, and then pick up what information they need as they go, we could give them if they were competent. And this is a real problem. Right,
and just to clarify for the ones that are listening to our podcast right now, what we're talking about right now is the UI for Iocoin. The UI for Iocoin is fully functional. There is no current problem with it. There is no security flaw with it. We are just talking about the ability to make our UI work even better with a whole bunch of features that we have coming out, and the fact that we're currently working on many different fronts. So we have had at times developers come to give us their ideas on how they would do different things, but when you're actually putting in the work, that's when it gets a little bit challenging. So moving forward, we are going to have now Chameleon, and we are going to have IOC to look after, and we can certainly do all the work. It just kind of slows down a little bit, where we really want to get a lot of things done and our hands are in multiple places. So hopefully a good developer that's out there listening to what we are talking today might want to come in and take a challenge, here to help us out with the UI. But aside from that, and this is only because we had to work from the current mock-up that we had on the IOC wallet, but comparing that UI to an HD wallet or any other thing that may be out there, it's night and day, right, Derek, in terms of security and the way we're handling this wallet for our users? Big improvement.
Much better. It is. I would say it is much better than an HD wallet. I would not recommend using an HD wallet.
And currently,
grounds of security.
those are the preferred wallets for many of the blockchains that are out there, just because people are putting in, their private keys and all of that, and that communication to a central server. If that server goes down, they don't have access to the private key at that moment, so they would have to wait for somebody to service that server in order for them to lock on. Our wallets, again, they lock on to the actual nodes, the other nodes that are on the blockchain. They have to sync, but that's the most secure way, because you're keeping your private keys within your computer. You're not communicating those private keys to a third party, even though some people may say, that it's okay. You really will then have to look, for example, smart contracts. We've had some tokens that are put out there with smart contracts, and the wallet, handling of those smart contracts. At times, they've been able to manipulate, some of the code to basically take out those tokens, and the balance that could be. I think it was in the Parity wallet. Derek, could you please talk to us a little bit about contract handling, what they're doing, what's the problem, why are these things getting hacked all over the place, and then talk about, a little bit of, how come IOC hasn't gone in that direction, but we are going to do it in Chameleon. And then later we'll talk about a little bit more about Chameleon, but more, what are these issues with the smart contracts? What's happening out there? Everything seems to be getting hacked. What's your view on smart contracts in general and all these problems?
Well, for example, in Ethereum smart contracts, they had an issue of infinite in smart contracts with no checks to prevent that taking place. So that we had so that they had a denial of service when they attempt to fix they tend to be imperfect, and from my view, they tend to do the fixes without properly testing them, and it's doubtful. I don't tend to look to code. I tend to write my own from scratch, but from what I've seen, their fixes are imperfect. And what they did wrong was they could have implemented the DDoS protection downstream from the virtual machine. So if they'd done it correctly, then they could use the real virtual machine instead of this hacked up stuff they have, 1024-bit limited stack. And instead of that, they could have the full Java runtime environment. Should implement the DDoS protection downstream from the virtual machine.
I remember when this guy said in the beginning that, you can change the state of a contract. And then I was like, well, if you can change the state of a contract, what exactly do you mean? Then, this DAO thing came out. I always had doubts of changing the state of a contract after you actually do the contract. And then the DAO stuff came out, and then the hack came in, and then they did it was like a child contract. And then they moved all those Ethereums to the child, and then supposedly you had two teams of hackers, the white hackers and the what the heck, black hat, I don't even know, black hat hackers, and the next thing you know is that all these funds are going everywhere, and then Ethereum Classic was born. I mean, it's been a complete mess, and the nightmares haven't stopped, with the smart contracts over and over. They're getting hit. And you had told me about the contract handling. Do you remember what exactly was about the contract handling that you saw that it was like not right?
Had no infinite recursion protection, and it was possible for smart contracts to call other smart contracts, which then they have callback. So it's possible to set up smart contracts which call each other on the network, and basically it's a denial of service. Another thing, they have this concept of gas in the virtual machine as a denial of service prevention measure. This really wasn't necessary to implement it that way. They can implement they should have either had a Turing complete language if you look in the white paper, it says a quasi language, and that's because it's, in other words, not Turing complete. They have this gas charge to prevent infinite loops and infinite calls. What they should have done is to have a Turing complete language implemented in the Java virtual machine. They should use the DDoS prevention parameters outside of the virtual machine. So, for example, in this case, although it's a bad idea, some form of gas downstream of the virtual machine. The machine would be unrestricted. Again, when you write something on Java virtual machine is very well tested, millions of developers all over the world. It's very well tested, it's stable, and then why should you write your own virtual machine then? It's hacked up. It's limited. It has this gas concept in there, which shouldn't be there. Complete language, they wouldn't need it anyway. The whole thing is a disaster. Like 10, 15 make a decision on how to do it, and they just messed it up.
Well,
it's just a disaster.
Good thing about this whole thing is that we get to improve on some of the things. This is why I always tell people it's not about how fast you go, it's how you are steady in the process.
Yeah.
And being behind in people's minds, they think that because you don't have the volume or the coin itself, that it's not in the coin market cap. I'm not. I mean, it's really important, obviously, to have good value, but more important in terms of scientific research is to see what the mistakes are, what are the mistakes that are being made, and what are the things that we can improve on, and what are the things that can actually be taken in terms of like to take it to the next level from a solid basis. But when you're having all these problems with the contract handling or different things, and you're building on top of that, it could be really, really a disaster if it all collapses from within, because
it's like building a castle on sand, or building castles on sand, and you're building software on bugs that haven't been fixed, or they've been patched, quickly patched. The bugs stay there. They're not tested, so nobody knows if the bug's waiting to happen, and that's buggy software.
When we've seen a lot of these challenges, a lot of people end up losing their tokens. What I've seen in the past is that, and I heard this a long time ago, where the contracts can change state within the code. So I think some of those areas, they tend to not be black and white. There's always this gray area. So I think that, in terms of smart contracts, we have a long way to go in terms of keeping them secure to the point where we can start storing valuable, let's say tokens. But sometimes the markets go way too fast in terms of the value of that said project that's talking about, what that project can do in terms of the, actual value. One of the things that's happening is that a lot of people don't understand, when you have Ethereum and you have, or any other blockchain that enables smart contracts, and I'm just going to say this, these tokens, when they are actually made, they require the actual underlying blockchain, which is Ethereum, to be syncing properly and have their blocks happening without any delays. Some of the delays have come from, for example, the Kitty game or any other DApp that's out there that's sometimes interfering with the speed of the transactions and or the blocks. And when I didn't mean the speed of the transaction more from the actual blockchain capabilities, but more from the amount of data that's being probably passed through the nodes and the speed that it requires. And then the smart contracts, I think there was like 10,000 smart contracts right now on the chain, and then making the chain at some point being a nightmare for some of the exchanges just to try to keep it up. So what would you say, which is something that we talked in 2014-15, which was there's not going to be one single blockchain. We thought that, for example, because these are data ledgers, so we thought that it will be multiple blockchains, and we came up with Chameleon at the time. We thought about this bridge mechanism, but prior to us thinking this, I know, Derek, that you were working on this prototype ledger. Could you talk to us just a little bit about Chameleon, the Ioc Coins official side chain, and what your views are on this, on what we're going to be able to accomplish once we bring Chameleon up?
What I saw long ago was that we have in the crypto space interesting coin projects, and find if they do anything, tend to be just doing a small set of things well, and that generally applies to everything in life. If someone does something well, it tends to be best if they keep it to those sets of things. And the same thing is in code. When you start to generalize to please everybody in a system, manpower, limited expertise in the individual fields, in the communities in question, then the quality starts to slip and the bugs come in. And I think this is what happens. This is what has happened in Ethereum. This is a good example. So it's always my view. It's always been my view that there are lots of interesting coin projects around that do some things very well. For example, in Ioc, we have our encrypted communication suite, file upload and encrypted messaging, and now encrypted group chat. In other coins, they have taken more of a specialization on, for example, file storage coin, and the way they store files by putting them over the network. This is something that we could also do. They're using a particular algorithm, which we could also develop on. The scientific computation, for example, Gridcoin is doing something very interesting. They are using a scientific communication platform that makes use of spare CPU cycles from your computer. So they managed to generate a lot of computing power by having a lot of nodes on the network. So that means that for an individual running this, his computer has to work harder because the algorithm makes use of spare CPU cycles, so-called CPU scavenging. And this is very effective. So you can look at a number of examples of very interesting projects where they've specialized in some particular area. What gets a bit silly is if you try to include the scientific computation, the encrypted communication, the file storage all into one single. Then it becomes a little bit silly and the quality starts to slip unless you have a very big team of people, and that tends to cost a lot of money. So my view has always been that the natural approach, use of the chains that do things very well by linking them together and coordinating them so that you have a single transparent interconnection of these services. And that means that the different blockchains then can do what they do very well, and they can, through the transparent interconnection, work in coordination with each other. And what really drives me to work on this project is that I see very intriguing possibilities and very interesting possibilities for working in the field of big data, or at least in the intermediate term on the borderline between blockchain and big data and artificial intelligence. And this is what really intrigues me to work on this project future and to keep on it. This is really what drives me on it. And this was the idea behind Chameleon. I had done some work on a similar system in the past, prototype phase.
I know you had it in a prototype, and a lot of people didn't know that, and we always said there is going to be, multiple blockchains, and we had said that, but we needed to have at least our main blockchain, which is the Ioc blockchain, have this core features coded and tested and ensure that they were secure, because this will be, and I call it a registrar, right? We have the aliases being handled, we have the communication being handled, and the document, and now we have this side chain and its own chain in Chameleon, and the bridging mechanism. Can you tell our community in small details how is this communication, how it is that these two blockchains can talk to each other, and what it is that Chameleon will bring to the table to either aid or enhance IOC or its own blockchain itself?
Preempt the white paper, but to go into some detail, we propose, for example, smart contracts which implements polymorphism. They consist of instances that implement some abstract interface then is specific to the class. The result might be execution of bytecode on the Sun Java virtual machine. This also is a whole range of Java SDK packages, or it may be an executable file, say written using C++, implementing some interface of pure virtual functions. It does not need to be in the chain. Stored, for example, in a Docker container, the chain in another virtual machine.
And then we're going to have these two, the Ioc blockchain and the Chameleon blockchain interpolate, right? And kind of communicate with one another. And we have talked...
The first step would be...
Go ahead.
So first step would be to integrate capabilities, so to speak, within Chameleon. And a transparent wallet with Chameleon and Ioc features available from one place. I know a lot of people hold many coins, and they store them on exchanges and so on, because it's not practical to have 6, 7, up to 10 maybe blockchains stored on your own systems. This is one big problem that people have that would be solved by, in an immediate practical sense, by Chameleon, in that through the transparency, one single blockchain to manage perhaps 7, 10, whatever different coins you have that are included in the Chameleon network.
That's very
important. The connection is handled by an abstract interface that would render nodes invisible to the included in Chameleon. By community effort, agent nodes could be constructed to run in the target networks of interest. Networks running in the blockchains. Communities with strong features would be interested in being part of Chameleon, so that their features are enhanced in coordination with the other interesting blockchains. What we hope and what we feel is that the communities, the strong communities, would be behind Chameleon in the propagation of agent systems to be placed within the networks. To some extent, in the early phases, this, so to speak, by other interested parties. Community effort.
Yes, that's really important, and I'm very excited to actually get the white paper out to a lot of our communities and the world. So far, what we can say before we release the white paper, and we've talked about this, for our Ioc coin holders to understand that there is going to be two side chains, right? One main chain, Ioc coin, and then another chain, Chameleon. But Chameleon has a protocol, that Derek just basically was just describing, that will allow for these multiple blockchains to speak within and exist within those protocols. So Ioc coin will always have in the forefront all of its features, which will not be native to the Chameleon chain or its protocol. They will be native to the Ioc coin blockchain itself. So that's why Ioc coin, it's really valuable and important. I will call it a premium service, to have all these different things in terms of encryption and allowing people to have a group encrypted chat. And something that we have not talked about is that the Ioc coin has our stealth addresses right now, and we were talking about doing ring signatures, but we held them back. So what is your view on privacy, Derek, in general, so that our community can at least hear your views on privacy and the things that you think it should be basically enabled down the line in terms of either ring signatures, but currently we have stealth addresses. So what is your view on it all?
Currently we have stealth addresses that are based on Diffie-Hellman key exchange. My view is that ring signatures would be very desirable as well. We got a bit prioritized with group chats, so we shifted our priorities around a little bit there, and so that's resulted in ring signatures being delayed. But I would say that's in the long term, at some stage, an essential symmetry to implement in terms of our existing stealth addresses, so that we have forward secrecy and sender secrecy as well.
That's really
going
important.
Forward. We can also go further and mask transaction data going down the line. And really, this is only stuff we're thinking about at the moment. But we could extend Diffie-Hellman to allow for transaction masked by encryption, so that only senders and receivers know the amounts that were transacted between endpoints. So there's a lot of interesting stuff we can go down there. And as we get onto Chameleon with its contract platform and flexibility that we're looking at, there are many possibilities that we can go down there. But certainly we could extend towards transaction information using Diffie-Hellman. But the ring signatures would be next. But we got a little bit prioritized with group chat, which we decided was more important, right, for the short.
Yes,
and then Chameleon.
And that's what we had decided on. So for the community, just to basically compress everything, Ioc coin has been going strong from 2014. We are listening now to our lead developer, Derek Hatton, and we have talked about a whole bunch of different subjects around Ioc coin and the features that make Ioc coin unique from its C++ peer coin. And we'll talk about proof of stake now, when, again, just to touch it up a little bit more, but group chat, encrypted chat, document storage, this is all now enabled and working on the main Ioc coin chain. We've also talked about a Chameleon, which will be our side chain, its own unique chain, but with a protocol that will allow for multiple blockchains to coexist with one another, and also maybe private chains or either public chains that could come into the Chameleon protocol. We just talked also a little bit about encryption and privacy of the Ioc coin and the stealth addresses and the ring signatures. So we have just two more areas to touch on. One of them would be proof of stake. There has been a lot of talk surrounding other chains that have been running in proof of work for a long time and now going into proof of stake. I can let you all know, community that is listening, that when we thought of Iocoin, we always knew that we were going to go to proof of stake. But the challenge that we had was, when were we going to switch the blockchain to proof of stake? Because for distribution, to do it fairly, we thought at the time we needed to do proof of work X11, which would make it more difficult for video cards to insta-mine the chain. So when we released Iocoin, we did it through proof of work X11, but within the first 2 weeks, we quickly switched over to proof of stake because we were already done with the distribution phase, and the miners had already mined IOC, and it went over to Bittrex, and eventually then we went on to proof of stake. Once you get these ledgers to run for a very long time in proof of work and you have to switch them over to proof of stake, it's a bit of a nightmare scenario, which I've read that they want to do in Casper. So we were just talking about, the proof of stake, versus proof of work, and I was just describing how we started, the Iocoin chain. In your view, and I know we're talking about Chameleon, a lot of people continue to say, proof of stake is not as secure as proof of work. I don't know if I'm right, because this is my view, but there's a lot of money being made from proof of work, because obviously you have to buy miners, and a lot of people talk about the generating this coins, that had value. And then they were saying, obviously, that on proof of stake, since you don't have to burn energy or buy this equipment, then the proof of stake coins, they just, you're making value out of thin air, let's just say it like that. But to be quite honest, the amount of utilities that are being enabled on the chain, that also brings value. But not only that, proof of stake, helps with the energy consumption, so and other things. But in terms of security, is there, and I know the answer, but I want to ask so that the community can hear, is there a big difference in terms of securing these two different chains? Do you see proof of work having some advantage versus proof of stake, Derek? And what's your view on this?
Well, proof of work in its current form, this mechanism for securing, in particular, the Bitcoin blockchain, estimates approaching 42 terawatt hours of energy per year. This energy consumption only one byproduct, and that is computing Bitcoin hashes to secure the blockchain. Calculations involved are purely hash calculations. With enormous investment going into the mining of Bitcoin blocks, there is the tendency that only the wealthiest individuals and syndicates can run viable mining operations. There's a tendency towards the Bitcoin blockchain becoming heavily centralized. That, and that only pure hashing calculations are carried out, in my opinion, proof of work in its current widespread form, without modification, is untenable. It is an obscene waste of energy. On the other hand, with proof of stake, blocks are generated by staking nodes with a probability in proportion to the number of coins that they own. This is less computationally intensive than proof of work, far less, very modest hardware. And the key thing is that this encourages all coin holders to actively take part in securing the blockchain. With the vastly less energy requirements, this means that proof of stake is far more environmentally friendly. One can say that the work in proof of stake, having a wide distribution of nodes, we can see that this is in some way the CPU scavenging systems that are very effective in scientific computation. One can achieve very effective levels of computation pooling from CPU scavenging, or at least low levels of CPU usage over a very wide distribution of nodes. And this tendency towards a wide distribution, uniform distribution over the blockchain, which has an increased tendency for security. improve work, you have this tendency towards centralization, and again, with pure house calculations, I would say it's untenable. It might be interesting where the calculations are used for some form of computation, for example, weather or atmospheric modeling or something like that. But as they are, I would say it's untenable.
Yeah,
I'd say that proof of work, if one had to choose one or other, and this excludes hybrid systems, I would say that there is only one viable option, and it's proof of stake.
And this always brings, the two camps, to basically bump heads. But what I have to say is that IOC has been running since 2014 in a proof of stake model, initially on a proof of work model. We don't have anything particularly against proof of work, but just what we just said in terms of energy and other things. In terms of security, Derek, what have you seen from our current stage now, 4 years in the running as a proof of stake model? I think it's been pretty solid, aside from
pretty solid.
Yeah, aside from people that have tried to mess around with the pseudonames, or whatever it is that they tried, which they couldn't accomplish. So
the issues occurred when we released a major update to the wallet back in January 2017, I think it was. We had a release with a major update, and there were some issues there with not a lot of people not adopting the new wallets becoming going offline, and so this caused some problems.
Yes, also the IP addresses, the virtual private IPs that some of them were using, they were not, being seen with the new update, so that caused some problems. But community was pretty good, in getting out of the VPNs and just staying solid on their IPs.
It's
and
pretty rock solid. And this problem was not a proof of stake problem as such.
Correct.
This is rather a software release issue.
Yes. But eventually we got over that, and once everybody was on the same page, and throughout that we didn't have downtime in terms of like the chain just kept on doing its thing in terms of the blocks kept coming. It was a really big challenge for the entire development team, but we went through the fire and we came out through the other side unscathed. So big hands to the entire team. We put in sometimes 20 hours just to ensure everything was good, and that's just short of amazing stuff. Derek, what do you see? Where do you see blockchain going? What do you think? What do you think we want to touch on, within Chameleon and all that moving forward? What do you think is going to be the new things, the new invention within blockchain that could really take it to the next level?
I'll look out for some new interesting projects just to spend time on and research. And what I have in mind with this one is the scope for turning this, what I see as a prototypical phase of blockchain, into something that's something that, in terms of its energy usage and its distribution, actually has something useful, and also has specialized features which can be used effectively with each other. So what I see with going forward is that blockchain can be used in conjunction with big data applications for example, improved industrial process. Open big data systems can be used there, and also medical and scientific. So it's a very broad spectrum of where we can open out our project. Science and medicine, in particular, what we're looking at is using intelligence on the blockchain to analyze big data patterns. An example is protein crystallization. In order to analyze a particular protein. One uses as the main method X-ray crystallography, and in order to perform that, the protein must be first crystallized, and this is the difficult part. Proteins the attempt to crystallize them is carried out in thousands of samples, and many of them fail, and this results in a lot of data from the crystallization attempts. So that's one area where we can come in to analyze using our technology constitutes a good chance of a protein being crystallized from that data. Then also there are applications in telecommunications, fault monitoring. The scope is very broad indeed.
So looking into the future, we see now a lot of people talking about artificial intelligence and the capabilities of current Iocoin, that we could store data. Where do you see Iocoin shining in the artificial intelligence side with Chameleon? What areas do you think we could potentially help in to possibly push AI or the IoTs? We've talked about this too, and in this area of all this different, we have now refrigerators, we have all kinds of things that the Internet of Things, how we call it, right? The IoTs. What do you see in that area?
Crucial thing that will take Iocoin forward is Chameleon, the way I see it. An example is to run a neural network within a tract. So one can construct and train via backpropagation a neural network on the blockchain. It will be able to analyze big data resources. One of the strengths of Chameleon is that an abstract agent interface will be implemented by the nodes in the target networks. This does not restrict Chameleon to blockchains. It can be applied to other distributed systems. So potentially any data is accessible by Chameleon. We can then, neural networks on the blockchain, analyze data, and we're not limited there. We can use genetic algorithms to apply simulated annealing. A whole spectrum of techniques can be used. The breadth and depth is really very great.
So one of the things I've said to the community from the beginning, you have people that come into the space and they're thinking about, creating a blockchain to make a coin, to then put it on an exchange and basically concentrate on the area of putting some random, monetary value into it. Then at some point dropping a dagger on the heads of a lot of people so that they can run away with as much money as they can, and never to come back. So that's one set of things. So then you hear a lot of these people talking about what people can earn if they join their coin or some type of fake, or hot air marketing scheme to try to get a whole bunch of people. What we can clearly say about Iocoin and the project that we've started, we are driven by scientific research. We are driven by trying to improve utilities within the blockchain, and that's one of the things that it's what we are trying to put out there. We're trying to put out there good energy as a whole, just to say this. And when I say this is, we are driven by code into doing things for the code and the chain to improve further upon what we already have been given to us in terms of distributed ledgers. So in the continuance of what we're doing in terms of the Chameleon and the Ioc coin, we will continue to advance in those areas, and we're hoping for our community to grow. We're hoping for people to be interested in the scientific side of things in pushing forward. But with that said, the last thing that I wanted to talk about is transactions. A lot of people now, even if you have a scientific side of the chain or not in terms of speed of transactions, sometimes are talking about Visa transactions. Why Bitcoin cannot go as fast as Visa? What can it be done? And then they introduce the Lightning Network, which was not within its chain coded from the core team, right? There was another team that had to come. Core team then actually accepted it. Then SegWit, which is a technology that code base that they actually enabled. So, for example, Litecoin and Bitcoin to kind of transfer coins within the SegWit blockchains. Where do you see either Ioc coin or Chameleon making advances into the speed of those transactions, if anything? TPS, which is transaction per second, and then on top of that, anything. Why are we not using the Lightning Network or SegWit, and we're going to be using the Chameleon protocol? So TPS and Chameleon protocol. How do you see that? And is Chameleon gonna have maybe something with SegWit so that we can actually communicate with the Bitcoin blockchain? So that those thoughts, what are your thoughts on those?
And the way in which we can move forward to increase transaction volume is by using techniques to distribute transactions over not only one blockchain but some set of blockchains. In contrast to Litecoin, or Lightning Network, it appears to me just a sticking plaster solution to Bitcoin's problems. They're using Lightning Network nodes, establishing channels, payment channels with each other to facilitate faster transactions. What happens is that you tend to have a network of nodes within Bitcoin, a subnet of nodes, which, if taken down, would have a very significant impact on its transaction throughput. So it actually results in a DDoS attack vulnerability. I see Lightning Network as a DDoS attack vector on Bitcoin, and it is not a good solution. It is neither decentralized solution. I think the problem is more fundamental, and that is that the Bitcoin network is not able to handle the distribution of transaction volume necessary to achieve very high levels. There you need to partition or distribute the transaction volume in over a larger scale to achieve that kind of throughput. Creating smart contract usage with that.
How do you think we can enable the faster TPS? Currently, we have, a lot of people don't know, we enabled 4 megabyte blocks. How do you see the handling of more transactions? Let's just say, and we've talked about this, 1 million transactions per second or even higher than that. We've talked about this. Can you enlighten the community on what are the things that we're thinking about to possibly enable this type of transactions per second, possibly now when Chameleon comes?
With Chameleon, we have the possibility for multiple sidechain networks to work together. And with this, we have the possibility for improving the transaction throughput that the system as a whole can handle over the multiple sidechains, so to speak. How they will evolve is a different matter, but we can talk about side chains and how the transaction throughput can be spread out over a number of network nodes. And there is the block size, which we've already increased. And those are the two main factors that would enable the increase in the transaction throughput.
We currently have, our 60 seconds, confirmation. Sometimes I see it at 30. At times I see blocks coming in at almost 15 seconds. But in comparison to Bitcoin, which is sitting somewhere around 10 minutes, we can definitely handle a lot of transactions faster, and confirm them even faster. But I think that moving forward, we're going to be able to do some amazing things once we bring the bridging mechanism into Ioc Coin within Chameleon. It's just so fun. Derek, if you have any final closing thoughts for the community, you're welcome right now to let our community know. Before that, I just want to let everybody know that's listening, we do have a treat for you guys, and that is that in Chameleon, we will be doing a 2-to-1 for each Chameleon coin to our IOC holders, and we'll talk about it in the white paper. But if you're listening and you're holding an IO coin, you'll be able to get 2 Chameleons per IO coin that you have. We will be doing a fundraiser, if you want to call it an ICO, for Chameleon, to try to raise funds to continue to work our scientific research through our IO Digital Foundation, which, by the way, some of the developers are not part of the foundation. The foundation, just to clear it here, has been basically a filter, let's just say, between developers and the community. But the foundation, it's not the sole overseer of this public blockchain, but it actually has been set up in some way just to try to have a bridge from some of the community people and the development community. So moving forward, there will be a fundraiser, or ICO, if you again want to call it, for the Chameleon project, and the Chameleons will be 2-to-1. So any IOC holder that's out there that has an IO coin, you will get 2 Chameleons per IO coin that you have. That will be resolved on release, but we are definitely looking forward to having our community in the world read our Chameleon white paper. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Derek for some final closing thoughts. Derek, take it over.
Well, I could finish off with a few words on Chameleon and my view, to reiterate on what Joel just said, that I don't perceive it as any kind of corporate or somehow private project that will be restricted to private usage. I think its strengths will come very much from being an open project that is community driven, where communities see the benefits of having Chameleon to interconnect with other services, and moving further along. What we really see, I think we can also say, as we've discussed, that Chameleon is really a project that we work on through love. It's a labor of love. It's something that we're interested in. That's why we're here, and that's why we're working on it. It is something of great interest. Its potential, the potential to see benefits in industry, as well as the scientific arena, as well as education, is very great. A lot of communities have interest and are willing to come along and check it out and see.
Lastly, I just want to say, like Derek said before, in terms of the protocol and the multiple blockchains, we had talked about DIOX, which is the decentralized exchange that will be within the framework of Chameleon and the protocol. So we are building a complete ecosystem, which is what we had said in the past. You're going to have multiple layers. on these ledgers. You'll have the Ioc coin, like I said before, with all these features for all of our users. Some of them are premium, and then we have obviously the Chameleon. It's changed with their smart contracts and the advances with the protocol for the communication of multiple blockchains. But also, lastly, we talked about hopefully releasing some type of public chain for the people to be able to have public communications, some type of Twitter-like public blockchain, which will be free for the humankind or people all over the world to access without having to go to an exchange and possibly buying some type of coin, but more of a decentralized free communication channels where it's tied up in one of the calls of the Chameleon, but not necessarily obviously within the Ioc coin, which we've kept enclosed to more of an encrypted and private communication, which would be a premium for the user. So some type of idea that we've been running around. So we'll see if we can at least have that in the white paper so that people know that we're going out. So in closing, I just want to thank Derek for all these years of hard work, along with the other developers and the community that's been with us for all this time. This was a treat for me and for the community to listen to Derek and some of his thoughts. We will be able to do an episode 2 when we're closer to releasing the white paper on Chameleon, just talking about Chameleon. Again, like I said, and we have said throughout the entire podcast, we are not leaving Ioc coin behind. We're just expanding the project, as we said from day one with Chameleon, and we're very excited for Chameleon, and we truly, truly hope that a lot of people can come in our journey to making this completely decentralized ecosystem where we have a lot of different parties coming in and having the possibility of interconnecting in a truly decentralized blockchain layer. Again, I want to thank Derek and everybody that's been listening to. This is Joel Bosch with the IOC community and dev team today with our lead developer, Derek Hatton. Thank you, Derek, for being with us.